At Sodexo, we are committed to gender equity. Our chairwoman, Sophie Bellone, stated, quote, "We believe that gender balance fosters creativity and innovation and ultimately drives better business results," end quote. Less than 10 years ago, female representation in senior leadership roles here at Sodexo was 20%. Today, we are at 32%, moving toward our goal of 40% by the end of 2025. We are proud to prioritize gender equity and to be a partner of the Women Business Collaborative.
Welcome back. And now, a panel discussion on the changing face of leadership, women CEOs, and the C-suite.
And welcome back, everybody. It is wonderful to have you with us. How great was listening to Magic Johnson just a few moments ago. My name is Jane Hanson. I'm a communications coach, and I like to call myself a reformed broadcast journalist. You can smile, everybody, at that. And I'm very excited about the panel that we've got with us today as we talk about the changing face of leadership, women CEOs, and the C-suite. And I will tell you that a lot of my work these days is done with female CEOs or people that work directly below them that are also female. And I'm so very proud and happy to be able to do that. So with us today is Lorraine Hariton, the president and CEO of Catalyst. Kimber Maderazzo, the chairman of the board committee of 200, Dara Klein, managing director of Kaplan Flowers, and Subha Berry, CEO of Seramount. So welcome to all of you, and I'm very excited to hear your thoughts today because I know you have an awful lot to say on this subject. And Lorraine, I'm going to start with Lorraine and Kimber as we talk about the whole CEO situation and what's going on there. Lorraine, as part of Catalyst, I know that has been a mission for you, that you have been working very hard, even though it seems a little bit like an eternity, to get all these women on to become CEOs. Where are we right now, particularly talking about the Fortune 500s?
Yeah, Jane, thank you so much. And I just want to take a moment before I answer that question to say that, I'm really glad to be coupled with Kimber leading the CEO subcommittee of the Women's Business Collaborative. And we also brought another committee member, co-chair, Anna Moot from Ascend recently to really focus on women of color as well. And we have some other partners like Equal Are, ELC, and Gender Fair. And together, one of the major things we do is we produce a report that we publish every year. In fact, in October, we're going to be publishing the next edition that really gives the state of play for every aspect of women CEOs, from the Fortune 1000 to the Russell 3000 to private companies and entrepreneurs. And this year, we're particularly focusing on women of color, which is a real critical issue. So the area that Catalyst is really focused on in that work is really the Fortune 500. And it's been a journey on the Fortune 500. This year in particular has been a really good year for women. We now have 8.2% of the CEOs in the Fortune 500 are women, and that is up from 7.4%. That's an 11% increase. And that's a record. There's some really notable CEOs that were added to that. Two Black women, Roz Brewer, who runs Walgreens, and Susanna, I can't pronounce her name, Duckett, who is TIAA. So apologize for that. And so that brings the total of women of color to 5. The rest of them are Asian, and there's no Hispanics. So we still have work to do in that area, specifically women of color. We have our first transgender woman, which is Sue Nabi, who runs Coty. And we have our first woman who's in the top 5, which is Karen Lynch. She's number 4 with CVS. And we have our first woman who runs a really major bank. That's Jane Fraser, and 9 of them are in retail. So we have a lot to celebrate. But if you really step back from it, it is really, we still have work to do. 8.2% is, it's progress. We were at about 5% for 4 or 5 years, and then last couple of years we've accelerated, but we're not where we want to be. The WBC set a goal that by 2025 we want to be at 15%. And by 2030, we want to be at 20%. If we continue our current course and speed, we'll probably be at 10% at 2025. So, what I'd say is, we can celebrate the successes, we can celebrate the women who've been successful, but we still have a long way to go, and we need to accelerate progress if we really want to get to parity.
Well, what strikes me about what you've just said, Lorraine, is that you're talking obviously about the fortunes, but then you get to the private companies or the smaller companies. And I think, Kimber, you've got a pretty good sense of what's going on there. I'm not sure the numbers are as good there, are they?
Well, believe it or not, there's a lot of women-owned businesses. There's about 40% of women-owned businesses, which is great. Women-led, I should say. The biggest concern is really, are those businesses to scale? So they have difficulty scaling because only about a 2.3%, which is dismal, of money is from VC funding is given to women-led businesses. So it's very hard for them to scale. So a lot of those businesses are very small. And when we look at women of color, 17% of them are new businesses, which is a great number. It's a record all-time high. However, again, only 3% of mature businesses being run by women of color. So the numbers aren't great, lots of work to do. C200 concentrates and works on privately held businesses along with corporate. A lot of the women that Lorraine mentioned are C200 members in the Fortune 500. So we're fortunate that we have the balance of delivering, and extending programs to women in leadership, both in public and in private sectors.
So, which leads me to another thought, Lorraine, and I know that you and Catalyst were really instrumental in helping create and helping kind of come up with the accountability, the standards, that sort of thing, of the Gender Equality Index, the GEI. And I'm curious how you think that, because now the numbers are out there and people can actually see them. How do you think that's affected the ability to get more women as CEOs?
Well, you've got to measure what matters. And the fact the numbers are there is critical. Not only the number of women CEOs, because that's pretty public, especially in the public companies. People know what those numbers are. But as you get down and you look at representation through the organization, those are the numbers that are really critical to measure and make apparent. Because we know, and the conversation that those of you who are listening to it with the CEOs, they mentioned that people are hiring in many organizations, especially retail and finance, 50% women. Sometimes it's more than 50% women. But when you get to middle management, you're 25. When you get to the top of the pyramid, we're under 10%. So the numbers tell the story of what's really going on. So we've been really advocating for transparency so that we can start really understanding the game. But that is not the only thing that's going to move the needle. I like to talk about 4 areas that are important. First of all, accountability at the top, at the CEO level and at the board level. And when we heard from the CEOs that won the awards, we know that they are really committed with intentionality to move forward. And that's why they're making progress. Number 2, you got to measure what matters. So you need to measure at every level in the organization, and then you got to hold people accountable for moving and making changes to those measurements. And if you make them public, then they're more transparent. So you can measure them and not make them public internally and externally, but more and more that's becoming a requirement. Employees are demanding it. Investors are demanding it. They're demanding it because they know it creates a better environment and they get better results. Number 3, you got to create policies and practices that help companies do things like sponsorship or give people line jobs. A lot of the things that were talked about in that conversation, people need to move around to the line jobs. And lastly, you got to create a culture that really does not have bias, that allows people to bring their full self to work, that allows people to hire and promote people, not in their image, but people who are different than them. So there's a lot of things, but it starts, the numbers tell the story, and that's where you have accountability.
And that actually leads to a lot of peer pressure, particularly with those public companies. I'm sure you'd agree with that. But now when you get to the privates, there's not that same kind of peer pressure, but there's other issues that might be at work, like people want to buy products from companies that promote strong women, et cetera. So Kimber, take me through this from the private company viewpoint, and the same issues that Lorraine just brought up about accountability and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, it's all the same issues that Lorraine brought up, because it's really the onus is on the CEO and the board to make sure they put the programs in place in the company. But when you look at the private sector, one of the key things is, and we really advocate for this at C200, is how do we get these female owners, these entrepreneurs who are driving their businesses, spending most of their time doing that, the support that they need through funding, through advocacy, through sponsorship. We want to get them involved in communities and networks that are going to help advance them. So even when you mentioned, supplier network, there are a lot of women organizations that will help them with their supply network, help them get into companies. So it's really, how do they work that network and have advocates that help them and advance their business?
Mm-hmm. Sounds like it. So here's a question for you. Then what about the male CEOs? What are they doing to leave a great legacy? Kimber, got any thoughts on that?
Male CEOs, we need them, right? That's the most important thing. We need them. So when you say legacy, if they're exiting from their position, we hope that they at least look at candidates or suggest candidates that are diverse and who are women also. It's important to do that. But as management replaces in an organization, especially when a new CEO comes in, that is the time to really say, how can we put in new faces, right? How can we change this? How can we intentionally do it? We've heard it through the panels today. I think the key is really making sure at least we get the candidates available to interview. And that's where the networks come in. If you have a great network, you know who those people are, you know other people who will know them, and there's candidates, there's people out there who are qualified. It's not about qualifications. There are people waiting in the wings to be able to be put into those positions.
Well, I have to tell you, though, that I have a couple of very close friends that are have strong recruiting companies that are recruiting for the top of the top, cream of the top jobs. And they find a lot of women feel like they've not been given the opportunity to take on the responsibility. And so therefore, they're out of there. So how do you deal with that kind of thought? And I can see you, Lorraine, have a thought on this.
Well, in the Fortune 500, to a large extent, you're hiring someone who's come up through the organization. So that CEO and that board and the policies and practices they put in place are going to be critical for whether the talent pool, when it comes to succession, has women in it. And unfortunately, the numbers are not really very good. Maybe 20% of the time, they'll have a woman who's really a strong candidate for succession. But that really is incumbent on the CEO to develop that pipeline. And that can be done with real intentionality. For example, Jane Fraser, who just became CEO of Citi, she was moved to line jobs that gave her the opportunity to compete. And, we just heard about Teresa, her story about she moved in her case, from line to staff, but that also broadened her experience. That was the CEO who was having that conversation with her, who understood what she needed to be broadened out so that she could take that CEO job. Those types of discussions, those types of intentionality need to happen in the organization. And then, coupled with, women stepping forward to take the risk to take those jobs as well. And we heard that story from her. But, I think that CEOs today, those like the ones who won the award, are intentionally doing that work to make sure they have a diverse pipeline that then becomes the final candidates for that CEO job. And it doesn't happen. You don't wake up. If you wake up and decide, okay, who am I going to look at? And you have all men in your C-suite, you're not going to solve this problem. You've got to look and do it over a 5-year period.
And is that as easy? It's not as easy to do, though, in smaller private companies, right, Kimber? Because there just aren't as many employees, and there aren't as many people moving up into those management roles.
Right, the spaces don't open. So
Yeah.
that is why, privately held companies, if it's women-led, women-founded, they should be really putting in pipeline opportunities for the women in their company and helping them exit their company, helping them start their own businesses, helping them get funding. So it's really, it goes back to that education and giving women the opportunity.
So I want to move on to Dara and Subha, but before I do, a couple of words from each one of you, Kimber and Lorraine, just like this, 1 or 2 words for action that you think you want to, what's the main message you want to give to somebody right now?
I'd say
I'll go.
intentionality.
Sorry?
Intentionality, that you need to go forward with intentionality in order to make change, especially at the top of the organization, the CEO and the board. If we want to make progress, it needs to be with intentionality.
And Kimber?
You have a strong community and network that gets you into those positions, and being intentional, like Lorraine said, if you have that community, you go to that community and say, this is what I want, help me get there, and put a plan together. So it's important to have those strong women and men both around you.
Look, I want to say one thing, which is back when I started my career in the broadcast business, women, there weren't a lot of women, and women didn't support each other very well. And I'm sure we've all had similar experiences at the beginning of our careers. I believe that has totally changed now, but still women need to support women. And if just a thought of how do you do that? Kimber, I think that's what you were alerting to when you talked about it.
Exactly. It's getting in communities. It's developing its opportunities. I think that women have to support each other, and I think they are. We see so much of it. You see these women on this panel who I've gotten to know in these last 2 years who have supported me and helped me through things. And we're here for each other. And it's all about opportunity and making sure that, your fellow sisterhood has that opportunity.
All right.
Yeah, I also want to just chime in. I spent most of my career in Silicon Valley. I was a tech executive and entrepreneur, and we had a networking organization in Silicon Valley made of women. It was, it's now called Watermark. It was called the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs and Executives. And that was my go-to organization where we supported each other and helped each other in an environment where there were not that many women, in these small startups. So, that was a great vehicle for me to really learn and grow in that environment.
And probably got you to what you're doing today, I guess.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's now go to Dara and Subha, because we've been talking about the word pipeline has come up a lot here, about pathways to the C-suite. So what does that look like in 2021? And how they changed, and especially in the last year and a half when we've all been through hell?
Well, Jane, honestly, we really need to call out the elephant in the room. And everybody talks about running P&Ls and how that's the pathways to the C-suite. And why is this a persistent challenge for women, for white women and women of color? And so we know that everyone in the C-suite, at least 1 in 5 are white women, but 1 in 25 are women of color in the C-suite. But 80% of these women hold either HR, legal, or marketing roles that are non-revenue generating, non-P&L roles, and therefore they are not pathways to the C-suite. And we know that P&L has always been and will always be, at least for the time being, the pathway to the C-suite. And if women are blocked, or we are not encouraged to take on P&L roles, how are we going to improve these numbers? And frankly, from a talent sourcing standpoint, women are minimally represented with P&L responsibility. And so how are we going to improve the numbers for these roles? And we just, as search partners, we really don't have a strong pipeline of women who have P&L responsibilities who we can put in front of our clients. We know that hiring organizations need to do a better job within their own organizations, within their own four walls, of getting women this type of responsibility. So how can we do it? We need to create the opportunities for people from different parts of the business to get P&L responsibilities. We need to rotate them through different areas of the business to get them more experience, and we need to give them the opportunity to give them stretch assignments. We also, and as it's been said, we need to educate our young girls and then our young women on the importance of P&L and on the importance of STEM, so that we are able to put them in a position to take on this responsibilities. And we should also, it was said earlier today, we need to encourage our women to self-advocate. We need to encourage us all that we are worthy, we can speak, we should speak up. And leaders should encourage us to take risks and these stretch assignments, and to give us advice and to support us, and emphasizing that this experience is going to help us move forward. And we need to provide the example that it can be done. And then finally, and also most importantly, as it's been said before today, we need to enlist our white male leaders to support women and women of color in the organizations, and they have to examine their own actions and their own behaviors and lead by example. And to really self-examine, to try to minimize the sort of old boys network that once was.
So what I hear you saying is that it almost sounds like there's just this real bias towards putting women in those jobs, even if they're fully capable of handling them. Is that correct?
You're so right, Jane. Dara is spot on, and we have research to back it up. Seramount's findings we did a study in 2019. It was called Gender Gap at the Top, and it explored this very specific topic as to why don't they seem to know how to navigate and put themselves in positions where they can actually get to these C-suite type roles. Firstly, it starts off at the entry level. The kinds of sales jobs, other jobs that are client facing, typically women don't raise their hands and step forward to them. So the ability for you to do a rotation through a sales role in early career can make such a huge difference, because you know exactly how revenues are produced. So from that perspective, we think a P&L experience is important, but it doesn't have to start with a big P&L role. It can start off with roles like in sales. Think about client-facing roles in early career. But it's still, we've found so many other different ways to get to it, but still getting that P&L experience and getting that rotation seems to be critical.
So when you're thinking about that P&L experience, what strikes me is sometimes those are also the jobs that require a lot more time in the office, or a lot of maybe traveling, certainly in the past, that kind of thing. I'm just curious about whether that means women who want to take those roles have to make some kind of a real choice about their family or the jobs, and if that gets in the way.
So a couple of very interesting things. I originally came from financial services, and, global rotations in jobs were so important. If you had global rotations, that actually positioned you for a bigger role. Mm-hmm. And very often women will say, well, by the time I get offered this global rotation opportunity, that's bang in the middle of my childbearing, child-rearing years. And that's not when I can go around the world to other jobs. So we changed that to say, why can't you give these early opportunities when they're still new in the business? Why do you have to wait till years 7 to 10? Why not in years 3 and 4? And I think that sort of mentality and mindset change within organizations will allow women, long before they get to those childbearing, child-rearing years, to experience these things. And on the part of the women, I would say to you, don't opt out. early just because you say, oh my God, I'm probably going to be married, I'm going to have children, so I'm going to opt out of it now. Lead with a yes and, not with a no but.
Mhm. Well, that which leads us to the point that flexibility becomes extremely important. And we all know that flexibility sometimes is very difficult to get. So how does a woman attain that? Because again, going back to the people I know that are recruiting like crazy and have many more jobs available than candidates currently, the number one reason that women have, in the great resignation that they're finding is the lack of flexibility. So you're talking about the need for flexibility. So now what do you do?
Well, I think the need for flexibility has to be across the board, because if we're going to talk about equity, it's flexibility for men and for women. So, I mean, this is not just a women's issue. This is an issue for us all.
And Dara, to your point, the next generation, the millennials, the Gen Z, they are forceful about wanting that for themselves, not just the women, but the men too. So guess what has happened? It used to be maternity leave. And then we looked at these companies that offered paternity leave and said, wow, this is great. Guess what? Almost 60% of the companies are now offering gender neutral leave for moms and dads. And that includes, think about the inclusion for same-sex couples and the likes. So I think that this next generation is forcing corporate America to rethink this notion of flexibility being just a woman's issue.
Mm-hmm. I see you nodding your head, Lorraine. Do you want to throw something in here?
Yeah, I think, and Jim Fettering mentioned this, that we are at a real moment of change in the nature of work around flexibility. In fact, I was reading a whole memo that went from this major Fortune 500 company around complete flexibility for work. And flexibility is location, it's time, and how we work. It's all that dimensions. The things that Catalyst and all of our organizations are advocating for many, many years is becoming a reality. And it's being driven by the employees. Because as we say, this generation is thinking differently. I'm actually sitting in Seattle with my son who just had his second child, and they are both at home. He has a 3-month leave from Microsoft. So, that is becoming the new norm. Flexibility on where and how you work is becoming the new norm, and it's going to be demanded. And the reason why these companies are doing this is because they have a talent shortage. They need to attract and retain the talent. It is being driven by this generation. So while the pandemic affected women mostly because the sectors that they were in were most highly affected, as we come back to this new normal, there's going to be greater opportunity, in my opinion, and we need to lean into that. And we need to get those companies to understand that if they lean into that, they can attract and retain the best talent wherever they are and how they want to work.
Which leads me to believe that maybe these numbers are just going to skyrocket the moment all those millennials get in charge.
I hope so.
They're already getting there. The millennials are already in the driver's seat, and that is here to stay. The other part is this notion of seeing alignment between values and what they expect and what the companies offer. And when they don't see that alignment, this generation says, I'm walking out the door.
Correct.
And with a talent shortage on one side and these employees wanting to see action and commitment on the parts of their companies, this cannot be lip service anymore.
The Edelman Trust Index, for the first time, employees were more important than the shareholders in terms of where the CEO and the board is focused. So the reason why they want transparency, the reason they're leaning into this is because it's driven by the employees and attracting and retaining the talent. So that is really powerful. That is changing the world. And we, my job running Catalyst is to make sure that everyone's leaning into that opportunity for change so that we can make progress for women and really for everyone, as we talked about, because everyone is benefiting. My son is benefiting because he's with his, 1-week-old daughter right now. That's something that when I went to work was not an opportunity for my husband. In fact, I went to work back to work in 8 weeks and 6 weeks because I was afraid that, culturally, I would not advance my career if they had any idea that I'd actually had a baby.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think we've all kind of experienced that through the course of our careers, which leads me back to this notion then of the Great Resignation about what happened during COVID, all the women who left their jobs, because many of them, those women of childbearing age now, are millennials. So it almost seems like a discrepancy in a certain respect, because if they have that flexibility, then why are they leaving?
Well, there are a couple of reasons that I see as causes for that. And I'm going to actually drill down and focus on multicultural women, because I want to call out the fact that in another 20, 25 years, our country is going to be minority majority, and 50% of that population is going to be women. So multicultural women are keys. And we talk about multicultural women, leaving the workforce post-pandemic in numbers that are so enormous that corporations should be shuddering. So why? And you look at the data, multicultural women start out ambitious, 25% more likely to aspire to senior roles as compared to white women. In fact, Black women are right at the top of that ladder. They are so ambitious about wanting, P&L role experiences, etc. So they have expressed that loud and clear. And yet all of those fall by the wayside. And if you ask Kimber, she will tell you that the largest number of small businesses are started by multicultural women. And you may ask yourself, why is that? If they're so ambitious when they come to corporate America, why are they starting businesses? Because there isn't a sense of inclusion for them. They feel like they are out on the fringes. They do not have the networks. They do not have the support structures, the sponsors. So when you really think about it, they're leaving not because they're not successful there, but because they haven't found a sense of belonging there. And they want to determine their own destiny. They go off and they start their business. That is what corporate America should be focusing on and figuring out how to solve for. Finding a way to hold on to their multicultural talent, because the drain they're having on that side is only going to accelerate and get worse unless some intervention or some tool is put into place to fix it.
Kimber,
I want to talk about the numbers a bit here.
Yeah, go ahead. Right.
Well, because, these numbers on the C-session, we talked to some economists that really drilled on it. The reason why so many women left is a sectoral issue. Retail, caregiving jobs, hospitality jobs, those are the jobs that were lost. They were particularly lost by women of color. Those are the people who occupy those lower level jobs. That's why they left. If we actually did comparisons, they didn't leave because of the childcare issues. Most of them can't afford to leave because of the childcare issues. That's the frank reality of it. They have, families who help them. But, as they think about going back, we're also looking at other alternatives. It's not, we know we have this big resignation. It's because people are reevaluating their whole situation right now. So, and as Subha just pointed out, multicultural women are also feeling more alienated. And if they have an inclusive leader, a manager who's working with them, who understands their circumstances, they're much more likely to stay with the organization or come back to the organization. If they're feeling alienated, they're going to go out and try something else themselves. So, I just wanted to debunk this a little bit because I really wanted to understand what was really going on here. It is true that it's been a real struggle for women and for everyone in this child care issue, but it's not the main reason why they left the workforce. They got laid off because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So Jane, both Lorraine and Subha, great input. But really, when you look at the numbers, just as Subha said, 17% of new businesses that are started are by women of color, and only 15% of them are white women. So it's that they don't fit in corporate America anymore because these corporations are not changing, and that's what it's going to take. Is if they want those great leaders and want them in their organizations, they have to be flexible. They have to be inclusive. It doesn't have to take having to be have a baby to be able to take time off and have that kind of work schedule that you want. And These millennials and these younger generations are demanding it. They're smart. They're saying, I'm not going to work in corporate America. I'm going to start my own business. And they're going out and doing it.
You know, Jane, I want to interject here because I think, Kimber, that's such an important point here. The millennials and the pandemic have created a perfect storm here. And we have seen some outstanding CEOs, the CEO of TIAA, I mean, so incredibly inspiring. And she said this morning, we have to decide, I wrote this down, we have to decide that we want to do more. So here's the difference. We have some CEOs like this incredibly inspiring and talented woman, and there are men like her too, inspiring. They're doing the right thing, but it's because they've decided that they want to do more. And so we have to continue to look for leadership who wants to do more and who wants to make change. We, you know, the sponsorship, we know that that is the case. We need to encourage our women and our young women to take on more technical roles, STEM, stretch assignments, all of that. But our leaders need to take accountability, and they have to decide that they can do more too.
But I want to get back to how you started this conversation, Dara, which was talking about P&L and that experience, because if that's still going to be the cornerstone, making the money, then how, companies have to make money or they're not going to exist.
So true.
But, so how do you change that chain of thought when you still got to have the bottom line of being profitable?
It's not going to change overnight, but if our executive leadership does not reach out into their own organizations and start from the early stages, bringing on people of color because they know that it is better for their organization, because they're going to make more money by having a more diverse population included in their organization, and then make the decision on saying, yes, you can, and include them and teach more people P&L responsibility. It doesn't have to be a select few. So I think that that executive leadership needs to reach into their own organizations and start much, much earlier. By the middle management, I think that that's a tall order.
Right. So what about pressure from the outside? Because we all know that millennials, for example, we've talked a lot about them, are all about sustainability, being climate change, being environmentally correct, there's all kinds of pressure coming in. How much can that actually help and force these top executives to change the way they're doing business?
Well, I think that's an important point, Jane, because we're forgetting about the consumer, right? These millennials are also consumers, and they vote with their wallets. And they will start looking at corporations, and if corporations are not doing what they need to do to satisfy the need of these millennials and be more diverse, be more inclusive, be more sustainable, they won't buy their products. And we're already starting to see that. And that's why these leaders in corporate America need to take close attention and say, what can I do to make sure that we satisfy our audience, right? Our clients, our customers.
Yeah. I have a 31-year-old who she's not buying things from places where she doesn't like how they operate. And she's very firm about that. And I'm willing to bet, Lorraine, that your son and daughter-in-law with the new baby and all the things you can buy for babies, they're probably watching that closely.
Absolutely.
Yep. You're right, Jane. I think the other piece that we shouldn't miss out is, I know Dara called out the middle managers. They have an important role to play here, because in our research, one piece that stood out for us was when you had an empathetic manager, that made all the difference between whether you wanted to quit your job because you couldn't take one more, tiny little piece of extra that was put on your lap because of everything that you were doing at home. So for women, especially for multicultural women, the ability to have an empathetic manager makes a difference. So the new calling cards, the language of leadership, you now have empathy and vulnerability. Those are the two qualities that people are laying out there. And these are innately things that women naturally do well. So what is the other side of it? What else needs to happen so that we can continue to be empathetic and vulnerable? And I would say to you, the opportunity to be allowed to fail and pick yourself up, where failure does not become career defining and career ending. And the challenge with being one of the few in whether it's a C-suite or the CEO role is all eyes are on you. Mm-hmm. And you don't have that opportunity. There are plenty of mediocre male leaders who fail and are given the opportunity to pick themselves up and try again.
Yeah, I see
we
them
need to do
upwards.
That. Yep. No, we need to make failure is the way we learn. And yet we make it so very difficult, whether it's a Jane Fraser, whether it's a Dashonda, whoever it is, we have our eyes on them and we're looking for every step they take. And I'm going to say to you, failure needs to be acceptable.
Yep, I couldn't agree with you more. What just happened? Did we just lose you? Oh, there you are.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. You were getting very emotional there. I wanted to see your face.
I've always said it's if failing is the way you learn, why is it that we make it so difficult for women to be able to do that? Why do they have to be these embodiments of, I have to be 90% ready for a job before I raise my hand. I have to do it well. And we are so hard on ourselves and on each other. I'm going to say to you, we need to make it acceptable for women to be able to take that risk, come up short, pick themselves up, try again, and succeed.
Yep.
And that's particularly true of women of color. They feel that they have to be perfect in everything. They have to fit into the exact environment. But I also wanted to pick up on something Subha said. Catalyst just issued research last week about the importance of empathy, and particularly the first line manager and how they can influence that, and actually the senior leadership, and particularly with women of color. The intent to stay. It's incredible the difference. If you have an empathetic culture and an empathetic leader, people want to stay. And that's been true through the pandemic, because empathy means understanding the situation you're in, adjusting the workload, being flexible. I believe that the type of leadership that women have traditionally been really good at, inclusive leadership, that is empathetic, that is curious, that listens, is the type of leadership we're going to need in the new hybrid environment we're talking about. And we're going to see more women in leadership because those are the skills that are going to be necessary to be successful. So this command and control, power, just do what I say approach to thing that's out. This is what's in. And I think we're going to see more women leaders in that environment.
It's interesting you say that, because in my coaching, and again, I coach a lot of C-suite executives, I've had them actually come to me during the pandemic and said, help me, teach me how to be more empathetic, teach me how to be vulnerable. What are the words I use? How do I become that person? And I say to them, well, who are you in your private life? What do you care about? And we literally go through some very kind of, it's a tough learning curve for some of them, because they have to literally say, I'm allowed to show how vulnerable I am. And yep. I'm allowed to have that kind of compassion for the people that work for me. This is something that COVID has actually taught us and brought it really to light, which I think could make some huge changes in the way that people manage.
And Jane,
it's like a muscle. It's like, learning how to do push-ups. Day one, you can only do one, but if you keep at it, you can do 50. So they need to think of it that way, and to gradually build that muscle up.
Exactly. Dara, you were about to pipe in.
I was going to say, building on that as well, they need to admit that they don't have all the answers, that change is really not easy for any of us. And they need to say, I need help too. And so by modeling that behavior, more people are going to follow them. But the older school leadership is afraid to put that out there, afraid to be vulnerable, certainly afraid to say, I don't know.
Yes, that's true, but I think they're learning that that's going to have to
One
change.
step at a time, or their staff is going to leave them.
Right.
Their staff is, because they can go somewhere else now.
So the WBC is committed to this goal of 10% of all women in the C-suite will be women of color by 2030, and 25% of candidates assessed for C-suite roles are women by 2025. How attainable are these goals? And where are we?
They're attainable. So this team will tell you we've gone over and over on whether we can ever meet those numbers or not. And at the WBC, there's so many organizations, I believe it's 55 now, that are working to achieve this and working from, from the beginning to the end, and making sure that women have those touch points and everybody's accountable all along the way to make sure we get more and more women in those CEO roles. Mm-hmm. So we're pretty confident that we can do it.
And here's some other good news, Jane.
Yeah.
We are working, we have a work stream. In fact, this group right here is, we are working on a work stream that is in place to focus on the pipeline to get to the C-suite. And we are putting together a white paper, an accessible white paper that includes best practices of women who have advanced through the pipeline. We're going to be interviewing women who have successfully moved through the pipeline. We're going to be talking to sponsors, and we're going to listen to their stories, and we're going to share them, and we're going to talk about critical networking relationships and P&L opportunities, and we're going to share a toolkit, and we're going to share the pathways to get there. And that's the good news that WBC is offering. And you're looking at the group who's preparing it.
Guys, yay, hooray.
Thank you.
I love that. And I think that will be extremely useful. But the other thing that strikes me is we probably really need to work with these young women before they even hit their careers.
Yep.
And college, even before college. And I'm talking about all women across the board, no matter what their ethnicity, no matter what their background is, to be able to teach them that they too can do it, and help give them some tools to accept failure, because we've talked about failure a lot today, and to accept what, to be able to understand what they need to do, how to advocate for themselves, because I think sometimes it's really hard for some young women. So how do you do that? How do you do that beyond?
I'll tell a personal story, I'll tell it really quick. I think it starts in the home. So when I was young, my father used to sit with me while he balanced his checkbook. And he would show me at 7, 8 years old how to balance a checkbook. And, when I became of age, and I immediately needed to balance my checkbook. So it starts young. And I ask all the parents out there to work with their daughters. And, like Lorraine just shared, she has a son who had a daughter. You have to work with your daughters and show them at a very young age, these are the things that they can do, and start educating them at a young age.
I think that's
a great point. It's a great point, Kimber. And I think the other piece of it is, we as professional career women, I know that mentorship and sponsorship has been talked about, but the ability to cascade that down, who you mentor within an organization, asking them who they mentor, and making sure that this kind of pattern of serial mentorship becomes core to what we do for each other. And so if each generation is there paying it forward to the generation behind them, then you can see how that can go to high school students, to middle school students, and grade students. I think it's never too early to start.
Mm-hmm.
I also think we need to encourage more women to go into STEM professions, especially to have strong digital literacy so they can compete for the jobs of the future. And, places like the Girl Scouts and Girls Who Code, and there's a lot of organizations there that are really helping with that. One story is, I have a computer science degree that I got actually in the late 70s. And at the time, there were more women getting computer science degrees than there are now. And it was when the PC went into the home and the boys started gaming, it became a cultural thing that was not cool for girls. But so we need to change that cultural parameter and get girls involved in the tech field, because almost every job is going to require a certain degree of literacy to be successful.
Exactly. Well, we have exactly 2 minutes left. So what I want to do is just go around and have each one of you, if you could just give some final thoughts, a little inspiration for our audience, and what you see for the future. Dara, can we start with you? Do you mind?
Of course, not at all. I'm going to really encourage all of you to self-advocate. Be confident. You are worthy. You have a lot to offer. And then I'll say to our men, stand up for your women colleagues, all women. We need you. We need to bring more women, all women, but especially women of color, into the fold. And we need the men to speak up for us.
Thank you. Kimber?
I encourage everybody to look at their social network and take a look at that network and say, how diverse is my network? And and if it's not, how can we bring in more diverse members into your network?
I love that. Lorraine?
I want to encourage leaders, CEOs, people in the C-suite to really lean into the change that's happening now in the nature of work, and to seize the moment to create a more equitable, inclusive, and fulfilling workplace for everyone.
And Subha?
Thank you. I actually did something in this past year and a half that I think was a great lesson for me, but it could be for others too. I keep it's not a diary, it's just a chronology of all the appointments I have and what I've done, what worked, what didn't work, and the likes. And I decided last year to call this my crisis journal, because I realized that when I aggregated what I took away and learned about myself, how I reacted, I realized that it really turned into outlining what my superpower was. And so the ability for people to take their mistakes, successes, and failures and turn it on its head to say, what did you learn from it? And what are you going to do about it? And then go speak to your manager about it at work and say, I'm ready for that next promotion, that next bigger job, because look at what I did. This last year and a half was incredibly difficult, but here's how I came through it and here's what I learned. And I guarantee you, we can run circles around what they expect of us in the workplace.
I love that. What a great way to end. Thank you so much, Dara, Lorraine, Kimber, Subha. Go to your closing dinner now, Subha. You have permission to leave. And
thank you.
It was really lovely to chat with all of you. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll say goodbye for now.